Hey, it's Nick again, and in this tutorial I want to talk to you guys about global illumination, and in particular how to set up your Grayscale Gorilla Light Kit Pro scenes and your objects to render properly with global illumination. I built the Light Kit Pro to not only render without global illumination and make everything look, all the reflections and everything looks nice, but the kit is also made to use within global illumination. And there are a few things to keep in mind when you do that, and that's what this tutorial is all about, is how to set up your scene, how to get it looking good, and how to use global illumination to your advantage, and also how to keep your render times as low as possible. If you've played with global illumination, you know it does take a long time to render, especially if you're dealing with animation. But I wanted to talk a little bit about what you can do to keep your render times down and to keep it flicker free and to make it look sexy. So let's hop in and talk. Well, first, before we jump in, let me just talk kind of globally about global illumination. The lights that you usually use to light your scene in cinema are kind of lights that don't actually exist. They kind of just they light the scene because that's what they're made to do. With global illumination, what global illumination does is it looks around at the scene, at the brightness of different objects, at the luminosity levels, at the brightness of the pixels, of the brightness of the HDRI images that you use, and it calculates a really realistic calculation of how that light would not only light the scene, but also how that light will bounce around the scene and fill in the corners and fill in the gaps. Because like when a light bulb is shining, it doesn't just go in one direction like the lights that are included in Cinema 4D. With global illumination, you start to allow the light to bounce around and to fill in the room in a more realistic way. So that's kind of what global illumination is all about. Again, it takes a long time to calculate. Sometimes 2, 5, 10, 20 times longer than a traditional lighting scene. But it does produce a really beautiful result, really accurate. And so I just wanted to talk about it, show you guys how to set it up. So let's jump in and set up some global illumination. Let's do it. Here we are. We're at the end of a scene that I built for the overview. If you haven't seen the overview, we just kind of quickly set this little light rig up, which is a key light, a rim light, and this kind of fill light spotlight down here that's kind of filling in some of the shadowy areas. What we're going to do is we're going to use these same lights, but we're going to use them to light the scene with global illumination instead of the traditional lights. And the first thing we need to do is turn off the traditional lights. The traditional lights are these things. They're, if you just choose a normal light out of these things, the any of these lights, even a skylight, stuff like that, those are just traditional. Those are lights that Cinema 4D have built to light the scene. What we want to do is turn those off, and that's what this light switch is made for. If you double click on the light switch, you're going to see there's some instructions. It says make sure the object is placed at the bottom of the object manager. And if you take it and drag it at the bottom, there's only one other thing you need to do, and that's click that button right there. Global light switch, turn it on. That turns all of our lights off. You're going to see we still do have our reflections, but the actual light that it was sending is gone. What we're left with is the kind of normal light that is just always on in cinema. It's called the auto light. And if you're concerned about the auto light, you can actually come into your render settings, go to options, and just shut the dang thing off. And when you go back, you're going to see all we're left with are the reflections. That's the first part. It doesn't matter if the auto light's on with global illumination, because as soon as we come into effect right here and click on global illumination, the auto light is automatically shut off. Once we're in global illumination, we have in our general tab, we have some options. Now, I almost never recommend just the pure IR settings. What I always recommend you jump up into is the IR plus QMC settings. You're always going to get a cleaner result. It does take longer to render, but it's always almost always worth it to jump into this category to produce some really, really nice GI. So the first thing we're going to use is the still image. In fact, let's just talk about these while we have them open. This one right here, this still image is for what it says. It says, you know, if you're only rendering one frame of 3D, then you can use the still image. This next one, this camera animation, is for scenes where there's really no animation except for the camera. This is used a lot for, like, if you ever watch like home remodeling shows and they kind of fly around a home that they're about to remodel and they're like, this is what it's going to look like, and they have the whole thing in beautiful 3D and they show you the backyard and the new chandelier and all that crap. That's usually camera animation where nothing in the room moves except for the camera. But more times out of not, if you're animating something, you're going to have to use the full animation. And again, for stills, you're fine with the still image. But as soon as you start animating any objects, if you're using MoGraph to make things bounce around, if you're shattering stuff, if you're doing any amount of animation more than the camera, if you're moving the lights, if you're moving anything else, then you need to use full animation. Now, this takes an incredibly long time to render, but it's always worth it. You need to use full animation if you're animating anything. Set it up, go to bed, and wake up and see what it looks like. For now, we're going to deal with still image only for these scenes. The diffuse depth is how many times the light bounces around a scene. So if you imagine, we go back to our scene here, and we have this light, we have this softbox. Imagine there's, you know, light particles, photons, or whatever you want to call them, coming out of the light, and it's going to be calculated where this light hits these objects. But then if you and that's one diffuse depth. If you turn this to 2 and come back, what it's going to calculate now is going to say, where does this light photon go once it bounces off this object? Does it go over here and light the background just slightly? That's exactly what it does. Or what does this light do after it hits this wall? It's actually going to bounce back and light the back of the object just slightly. And this is where global illumination really starts to shine, is these bouncing parameters, right? So we have a diffuse depth of 2. Primary intensity is 100. Secondary intensity is 100. That's fine. These are just the amounts that they bounce. Now, gamma is always what your monitor gamma is. In this case, I have 1.8 gamma. If you're running Snow Leopard on a Mac, you're going to have 2.2 gamma. And if you're on a PC, you're going to have 2.2 gamma as well. So figure out what your screen monitor gamma is. Put that number right there. We are done with this general tab. Let's go into the irradiance cache tab. And the only two things we're concerned about as far as the kind of scope of GI is concerned. Now, I'll be honest, GI, it can be a whole hours and hours and hours of training have gone in to try to make people understand how global illumination works. This is a very simplified version. I know I've talked a lot already, but understand that this is a very simplified version of GI, but we're going to know enough to make our stuff look really good. So in the irradiance cache settings, these stochastic samples, I think you say, is default medium. Now, I use the presets. There's low, medium, high. And in this record density, there's low, medium, high. And that's all we're concerned about right now. Basically, I'm going to set them both to low and show you what's up. What I usually like to do is work at low settings just to get the idea of what things look like. And you're going to see what happens with low. And then you're going to see when we come back in and switch it to medium, what that changes and what that fixes and stuff like that. So for now, just know there's basically, you know, good, better, best, right? And that's where we're going to leave that. We have 2 bounces. We have still image. Let's finally come out here, select our camera, hit render, and stop talking and start looking. See what the heck happens. Look at that, dude. Man, I just love GI. That stuff looks so sexy, right? let's talk about what happened here. The calculation did this first pass, which was all those dots that you saw. I'm just going to click it again. You see all the dots, and then you're going to see it going to bounce around these squares, and it's going to calculate where all the light is, how it's bouncing around the scene, and you end up with this really, really beautiful, realistic kind of visual of how the light is bouncing around. You see we have this kind of blue highlight here in the corner. That's coming from this blue softbox that's just sitting right off the edge. In fact, if we pull out and we do a render from out here, you're going to see this kind of the whole studio being lit up, how this light is affecting the object, how this is kind of hitting the floor, where the blue is coming from back here. It's getting really, really cool results, right? Let's head back into our camera and see what things we could see, like maybe that are wrong with the low setting. Mainly the problem is that these shadows are a little bit too diffused, and in some cases you're going to see kind of spotting going on. Right now, this is actually looking pretty good for low settings. I'm actually pretty happy with this. If you're having any issues with the low settings, all you do is come in, back into your irradiance cache in your render settings, go to medium, come back, hit render. Now you're going to see it's going to take maybe 3 times longer. It's going to take a little longer. And that's basically higher settings. You can see it's refining how the light's bouncing around, how accurately it calculates all of this stuff. And then it's going to kick back to you a render. Now, in this case, we're not gaining a whole ton lot from going from low to medium and even to high. But in some cases, depending on how kind of intricate your model is, how detailed, if you're using text, especially if you're using more spotlights and less softboxes. So the advantage of using more softboxes is you kind of cheat the low settings of the global illumination a little bit more, and you don't have to crank the settings up as much. If you light a scene with nothing but spotlights, you're gonna see a lot more variation and a lot more problems that you could usually fix by just upping this from low to medium to high. Again, there's way more detail in global illumination that I'm getting into, but know that if you're getting splotchiness or inconsistent shadows, you need to turn this up, and both of these up usually. So you could try one or the other, and then that's it. I mean, diffuse depth, if you turn it up, I'm going to turn it back to low because we had some pretty good settings. As you turn up the diffuse depth, you're going to get a more and more accurate bounce system. And in fact, what's really nice about diffuse depth is, let's say you change the color of your paper, right? So this is sitting on this kind of paper texture. Here's the Studio L. If we just double click that, we open it, we could change the paper texture to like an orange. You know I love orange. So let's just make it orange and check out what happens, right? This is where global illumination really starts to show itself. The orange of the paper is not only reflected up into the balls here, the items, but it's actually coloring the object. In fact, if we were to turn off the glossiness of our, if we were to turn the reflections off on our subject here and hit render, you're going to see the orange still creeps up. There's no reflections. You still see all the lighting, but the orange is actually creeping up into the object. And this is how things happen. This is how things are lit. If you put light on an orange piece of paper, it's going to reflect back orange colors. And this is, again, where global illumination really starts to look pretty dang cool. Now, if you are going to animate, let's talk quickly about animation, right? So I'm going to take these reflective ball things here, In fact, I'm just going to turn off the reflective ball things. I'm going to add a cube. Okay. I'm going to make our color white again. I don't need a orange floor. I'm going to make a cube. I'm going to put the reflective texture on it. What the heck? And I'm going to move my camera around just enough. I could leave it straight. I think instead what I'm going to do is rotate the cube around and just kind of off kilter it just a bit. Now you need MoGraph module for this. In the MoGraph, I mean you have MoGraph anyway if you got the training. I'm gonna add this into a cloner object. Add the cube in. I'm gonna say only one clone. I'm gonna move the whole thing up, tilt it. Should have done that first. There we go. And on the cloner object, I'm gonna right click and add a MoGraph rigid body tag. And I'm going to do the same thing to my Studio L here at the bottom. I'm going to add a MoGraph rigid body tag. And now when I hit play, it's going to fall. And that's it. That's our animation, let's say, right? So I'm going to kind of pause it right before it hits the ground. We're going to make sure our shadows are looking good. And in fact, I'm going to go forward a few frames. And we're going to talk briefly about... Okay, let's make sure it touches the ground. We're going to talk briefly about the quality of the shadow. You can see how soft the shadow is, and it's actually maybe even a little too soft. You can actually start to see some of the splotchiness that's going on behind our cube. And this can all be fixed. I'm going to turn our reflections back on. This can all be fixed by turning this from low to medium. And just by going from low to medium, you will see the render go up. There's just no other way to make it better than it needs more time to calculate, essentially. But you can see we actually have a sharper shadow. The shadows are getting more refined and more realistic as we turn that setting up. So if you're finding that your shadows are a little kind of mushy, feel free to crank and crank and crank the settings up. Again, at the expense of a higher render time, but you can see now with high settings, look at how sharp and how accurate these shadows are starting to look. Under here is really dark, and over here we got the blue reflection off the side. The blue is actually traveling all the way to the cube and then bouncing down. Really beautiful stuff. But just know if we go back to low and come back here, the things soften up a bit. For the sake of this tutorial, I'm going to leave it low, just see what we get. And right before we render, I think I'm going to go to medium. But I just want to show you how to set up an animation. If we go to general, we're going to go to, because something is moving, we need to use full animation. There's almost no way around it. There are other tricks that people talk about that I've tried, and it's usually for me not worth playing around with. Go ahead and just use full animation, come back, and then when you do a render, you're going to see in the still image it's going to be fine. But if we were to come in and set up our saving and everything, if we were just to actually go to output, let's see how many frames we have here, just so we don't have to render too much. 40 frames, right? So let's say we start it around 9 frames and we go to 40 frames. So let's go in here. Let's go to output. Current frame. We want a manual setting. So from 10 to 40 is our animation range. Frame step, good. 1. Everything else is ready to go. I'm going to keep it really small, just so we could watch it. I'll maybe go to 500 just to make sure we could see the results. I'm going to go ahead and hit render. There's no place I set to render, but I'm just going to go ahead and do it anyway. I'm going to set this to 100, and you're going to see what's going on. It's actually doing this preparing thing, right? And I left it on low settings. If we go back to our global illumination, we're still on low. So we're actually going to see how this looks at low setting. And we're just going to see how long this takes. I mean, basically, I'll be back once this is rendering. And another quick thing before I leave you, remember that when you're using the full animation IR QMC right here, that you're not even going to see a frame of this thing until it does all of the calculations. So you remember those dots and things that we got when we were doing this? These dot things, you remember that? That's essentially what this whole thing has to do. It has to do all the dots, all the calculating for every frame. In this case, only 30 frames, but it has to do all those calculations before we even start to see an image. So just keep that in mind. I guess, I'll see you back here when this thing's rendered, and we'll talk about the output and what maybe we could have done and what the medium setting would do and stuff like that. So I'll pause it for now, and I'll see you back when it's finished. All right, here we are. We're back. The render just finished. It looks like it took about 2 minutes, which isn't too bad for 30 frames. This is at a low setting, and there's not too much bad going on. Now, there's a ton of cheating going on. There's only one object. If you have obviously more than one object, which you probably do, you may start to see some issues. If you look really closely at the shadow below the cube, you're going to see a little bit of wonkiness there right at the end. I should have extended it maybe one more frame. You maybe would have seen it a little bit better when it rested. It's starting to get a little jacky weird, kind of right there and also right there. Really subtle. This is actually not too bad for a global illumination render. So I guess just keep in mind, just don't do more than one box falling and you're all set. Just kidding. If you essentially, if you encounter issues, if you don't like the results, my theory is start low, do the render low, do it not only low but also small resolution like we have here. This is 500 by something. Do it small resolution, and also do only a few frames. See how there's only 30 frames. We went from frame 10 to frame 40. That's only 1 second of animation, and go find the most complicated part of your animation and render that first. Right? So we don't really care if it's floating, or we don't care at the end here that it's just sitting there. But what we do care about is when it's interacting with the ground and all this stuff. So find the most complicated part of your animation, take a 2 second, 1 second chunk out of it, plug that into your render settings in your output. In this case, 10 to 40 was just about right for us. And then do a test render. Walk away, eat a sandwich, come back and see what it looks like, and then start adjusting. And then you can make really, really specific decisions on whether or not to crank these up. So again, we started low. We ended up okay. It's not looking too bad. I bet if we did a more complicated render, we probably need more stuff. So in fact, let's just at the risk of being crazy about this, let's go ahead and make a more complicated render and see if we can't kind of get to a point where we need to turn that up just a little. So I'm going to shrink the cube. In the cloner, I'm going to make more clones, and I'm just going to kind of have them come out this way. I'm going to move the whole dealie this way, and maybe there's 4 clones. Yeah, that's it. And then they're going to come out, and then they're all going to bounce. But I don't want them all bounce at the same freaking time like that. So I'm just going to rotate them a little bit. So now when they fall, they're all going to do their own thing. Let's do a test render with them all on the ground. This is looking fabtabulous. I'm gonna just scale up our cubes just a little bit, and I'm trying. At this point, I'm trying to break it just a bit to try to get some weird results. I'm also gonna cheat some weird results by turning off our, or turning down our rear light, this blue rim light back here, is kind of, when you have so much fill light, your shadow kind of quality and stuff can kind of get covered up because there's so much light bouncing around, then you don't kind of see stuff. So I'm gonna actually just turn up our front light. I'm just trying to make conditions where we're gonna start to see some funkiness going on. I'll turn that rear guy up just a bit. Okay, I'm guessing we're gonna get some crazy shadows. So let's find our kind of fun area. We're gonna go 10 to 60 on this one. 10 to 60. So this will take a little bit longer, but I'll cut out the slow stuff for you guys and just tell you how long it took to render. So on your output, we're gonna go 10 to 60, bam, just like that. And then, you know, I'm just gonna save just in case. You know what I'm saying? I'm gonna go desktop. I'm gonna say, you know, boxes test, just in case we crash. You know, you never know. So we're all set to go. We're gonna do a quick render, and I'm just gonna try to show you guys what this stuff looks like when you don't set it up right. Now, I am still on full animation. This is where you need to be if you're animating stuff. It's just where you need to be. I'm still on low settings, and we're gonna hit render, and it's gonna ask me, am I sure? And I'm gonna go, yep. And now it's gonna do this thing again where it calculates. See all this crap it has to calculate before it even starts to render a real frame? Just get used to it. This is what happens. So I'll see you back, I'm guessing, in 6 minutes, whatever. I'll just click back when it's over. I'll see you guys there. All right. Just finished rendering. And I see a weird frame already. This is kind of what we're talking about. See how the cube's kind of supposed to be on the ground, but it's getting weird shadows around the edges right there. And it may still kind of be moving, but you can see as I'm scrubbing, you're seeing these weird little flickery reflections around the edges of the cube right there. See that? That's kind of what I'm talking about. Those are the kind of the things that you need to look out for when you do a render, and you need to decide how much it bugs you. If maybe you could just, you know, paint over that frame or whatever. You can see Global Illumination makes beautiful, beautiful lighting and rendering, but those little flickery issues can really kind of distract a viewer from the animation. You can look at this one too. It's kind of flickering. It's like blub 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 blub. Kind of tickles the, you know. You see what I'm saying? Right there. Kind of gets funky. This one gets funky right there. Right when it hits the ground, it kind of blows out this weird color. And this one too, as it ends. So these are the things that you need to look out for, and sometimes they're way more visible than this. In fact, I'm seeing some weird stuff right there at the end of that one as well. So those are the things you need to keep an eye out for, which are just calculation errors that you may need to come back into your settings. I'm just going to pause this and shrink it down here. You may need to come back in your settings and move this up to medium, and then do another test. Now, that one took 4 minutes. So it took twice as long as the other one because there's more stuff to calculate. But if we moved it to medium, I'm sure it would take at least another twice, probably 4 times as long to calculate. But this is why you keep your chunks really small. You do 10 little 10-minute tests, and you refine your complicated bits of your animation until it looks good. And then you have to take the gamble, the overnight deal, and just hit the render and see what happens. These are the things that you just have to happen when you're dealing with Global Illumination. There are other ways to kind of tweak and play with Global Illumination, include all these settings. There's also this Irradiance cache file, which I talk about on my blog. Actually, if you Google Irradiance cache file, get to my go to Grayscale Gorilla and do a quick search even at the site, you'll find some talk about the irradiance cache file and what that does. This allows us to calculate it once and then render different settings and do stuff like that. So keep that in mind. That's a way to do it. But at the end, you just kind of have to realize global illumination takes a long time to render, and it looks good if you get the settings right. You know, maybe there'll be like a full how to use global illumination thing out one day. I don't even know a lot of these settings, but the thing to keep in mind is you got to pick the right one here. Still image for stills, camera if only the camera is animating. As soon as any objects are animating, you need full animation. Net render is for multi-machine, you don't have to worry about it. Sky sampler only works with HDRI images or sky images. It actually works pretty well, but it only works with HDRI images. So what you could do is use this with the HDRI sky object. So load an HDR sky object, then use then use the sky sampler to render. In fact, this is turning into a longer thing than I thought, but let's just go ahead and set that up and just kind of round out our global illumination talk with a little bit of sky object stuff. So this is a pre-made HDR image that will come with the training that, you know, basically I showed you how to build in other tutorials here. What we're going to do with this is we're going to light, let's see if we could find something. There we go. Grayscale Gorilla Light Pro. Go back to window, go back. Sweet. Okay, now we're going to light this using our sky object, right? So if we hit render, right now there's nothing, okay, except for reflections. But if we go to render settings and go to effect, global illumination, and go to sky sampler, come back, hit render, you're going to see it's going to do some calculating, and then it's going to come back with bam, just like that, lit, ready to go. Now I'm going to try to get some reflections on this thing just so you could see some of the reflections going down. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So what it's doing, what this and this only works with HDRIs in the sky image. So we're using the LightKit Pro HDR Sky module to load in a pre-made HDR image. We could adjust the brightness. We could turn it up. And we could rotate the image around and get different looks. You know, that's what this does. You could look at the tutorial on this if you want to learn more. We're going to crank up the brightness, and then the only other thing you need to worry about is the grain. And this actually works well with animation as well. It's pretty quick to render. The only thing you have to keep an eye out is for this grain. You see all this grain that's going on in the shadows? The way to get around that is to come into Sky, in the samples, crank that up, and obviously, you know, it'll take longer to render. That's always what happens. And you can see the grain start to go away. Bam. And again, it's all about finding the right level between the setting, the render time, and how it looks. So that's looking better and better and better already. And in fact, it works pretty well with a floor. You could add a floor in it, hit render. You could animate stuff. You don't have to worry about the whole camera animation, stuff like that. So this may be a good way to play if you're just using like MoGraph and you're bouncing, you know, a bunch of cubes off the floor like we were before. You may want to try a little bit with the Sky Sampler and go that way. So anyway, that's it. Those are basically, there's no other options for the Sky Sampler. Really simple. There's the brightness, and then there's, well, we can also adjust the gamma, which we should have set to 1.8. I'm going to crank up the samples one more time just to get a nice clean render for us. You can see it did take a little bit to render. And just like that, we have our reflections. We have everything ready to rock, ready to animate, looking good. So if you stayed to the end, you got the extra little special there. Sky Sampler is a nice little fun thing to try. So if you're having real problems with full animation, you don't want to wait that long, and you have an HDR image maybe that you built using the kit or anything, load it into the HDR Sky and go to Sky Sampler, see what that looks like. So that's it. Thank you guys for sticking around this long and watching the Global Illumination tutorial for the Grayscale Gorilla Light Kit Pro. I thank you once again for purchasing this. It means a lot to me, and I hope you guys like it. I know you will. Put a lot of time into this, and it really is just really exciting for me. So play around with it. Send me something cool if you make something cool with the projects. I would love to see it as well. So anyway, I'll stop talking. You guys go play with the kit. Thank you so much again for purchasing it. You guys are the best, and I'll see you guys in another tutorial. If you have any questions, please refer to the video questions, and hopefully everything will be answered there. But again, go play. Thank you guys.